No, I did not have anything pulled up. I'm trying to get the audio started. Chapter 5. It's just really funny thing that happens sometimes. I think it's funny. Where people come into my comment sections on my videos, whether that be on here or social media or whatever. And then they talk about how much they don't like, my glasses are foggy, they don't like my narrating style. There's so many different narrators that narrate so many different ways. Some have softer voices, some have rougher voices, some have lower voices, some have higher voices, blah, 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 on and on and on. Some talk slower, some talk faster, some talk, there's so many different ways to narrate, okay? And I think it's funny when people come into my comment sections on my videos, on my accounts, and are like, I hate the way that you do blah, blah, blah. And I'm always like, you know what? My comment is either I will ask, really, who is your favorite narrator? Or I will say, you know what's so cool? There are so many other options out there. I hope you find the one that you like the best. Because truthfully, if you are in any kind of creative field, trying to get my chair in the right space. If you are in any kind of creative field, you should know that not everybody's going to like what you do. The end. Like, that's just life. But I think it's funny when they come into my comment section, I'm like, it would have taken you less time to just scroll by. But you stopped. You chose to comment in my space on my account. So I'm going to comment back. Am I going to give the trolls what they want by like freaking out about it? No, because that's not who I am. And that's just going to give you what you want. And I don't want to do that. So that happened to me on one of my accounts. And it's okay. I mean, you are entitled to your opinion. You are entitled to not like it. I just don't understand why you felt the need to leave a comment on my thing. Also, I am over 40,000 downloads for this podcast. So clearly, enough people like me that they continue to download and listen to the podcast, whether that be on here or on a podcast platform. So, sorry, I'm not your cup of tea, but I am a lot of other people's. It tells me somewhere how many unique listeners that is. I just never, it's not in an easy spot to find, using Vaseline. So it's typically not the number that I look at because the easier number is the giant 42.9, I think I'm at right now. 1,000 downloads. It's a much bigger. Goodness, excuse me. Actually, let me see. Does it tell me? Downloads. Not here. I think I gotta go to analytics. Downloads. I know it tells me somewhere. I don't know where it is. I thought it told me somewhere. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't have as many downloads this month as I did last month. Or maybe this is it. I don't freaking know. We're wasting time. I don't actually see where it says. They may have changed. Analytics change all the freaking time for everything. They may have changed it. I don't know. Anyways, let's go. Today we'll be continuing Joe's Boys by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 5, Vacation. Everyone was glad of a holiday next morning, and all lingered over the breakfast table, till Mrs. Joe suddenly exclaimed, "Why, there's a dog!" And on the threshold of the door... Nope, that's not still her talking. "Why, there's a dog!" And on the threshold of the door appeared a great deerhound, standing motionless with his eyes fixed on Dan. 16. "Hello, old boy. Couldn't you wait till I came for you? Have you cut away on the sly? Own up now and take your whipping like a man," said Dan, rising to meet the dog, who reared on its hind legs to look his master in the face, and bark as if uttering an indignant denial of any disobedience. "All right. Don never lies." And Dan gave the tall beast a hug. adding as he glanced out of the window where a man and horse were seen approaching. I left my plunder at the hotel overnight, not knowing how I should find you. Come out and see Oktu. Come out and see Oktu, my Mustang. She's a beauty. And Dan was off, with the family streaming after him to welcome the newcomer. They found her preparing to go up the steps in her eagerness to reach her master, to the great dismay of the man who was holding her back. Let her come, called Dan. She climbs like a cat and jumps like a deer. Well, my girl, do you want to gallop? He asked, as the pretty creature clattered up to him and whinnied with pleasure as he rubbed her nose and slapped her glossy flank. That's what I call a Teddy? No, it's Tommy that has the voice. That's what I call a horse worth having, said Ted. Ted. Older Teddy. Muffins for tea. Not quite right. That's what I call a horse worth having, said Ted, full of admiration and delight, for he was to have the care of her during Dan's absence. What intelligent eyes. She looks as if she would speak, said Mrs. Joe. She talks like a human in her way. Very little that she don't know. Hey, old lass. And Dan laid his cheek to hers as if the little black mare was very dear to him. Rob. I'll open the oven. What does Oktu mean? Asked Rob. Lightning. She deserves it, as you'll see. Black Hawk gave her to me for my rifle, and we've had high times together out yonder. She's saved my life more than once. Do you see that scar? Dan pointed to a small one, half hidden by the long mane, and standing with his arm about Oktu's neck, he told the story of it. Black Hawk and I were after buffalo one time. Oktu, we should probably look up how to say that. No, Octo. No, it's giving me all these pronunciations for octopus. That's not it. But didn't find him as soon as we expected. So our food gave out, and there we were 100 miles from Red Deer River where our camp was. I thought we were done for, but my brave pal says, now I'll show you how we can live till we find the herds. We were unsaddling for the night by a little pond. There wasn't a living creature in sight anywhere, not even a bird, and we could see for miles over the prairies. What do you think we did? And Dan looked into the faces round him. Ate worms like the Australian fellows, said Rob. Boiled grass or leaves, added Mrs. Joe. Boiled glass? Boiled grass or leaves, added Mrs. Joe. Perhaps filled the stomach with clay, as we read of savages doing, suggested Mr. Bear. Killed one of the horses, cried Ted, eager for bloodshed of some sort. No, but we bled one of them. See, just here. Filled a tin cup, put some wild sage leaves in it with water, and heated it over a fire of sticks. It was good, and we slept well. Josie. You know what's funny about people that complain? So I used to, like when I started narrating, I would always go up, like a question at the end of sentences. People didn't like that. And now what she said was it sounds like I moan at the end of my sentences. And people don't like that. So I can't go up and I can't go down. I mean, at this point, I've narrated over 100 audiobooks for authors, okay? Like 120-something. And I've narrated another 20-something for the podcast. And I've narrated another few fairy tales for a different podcast. Like, I have done a lot of narrating and have refined my style from the early days of where I got a lot of complaints about how I narrated from listeners on here. So I just say, it's like you're never going to please everyone. So just do what you want to do, and I am getting the jobs. I had a couple weeks ago, I got hired on with a production company who called me an incredibly prolific narrator because of how many audiobooks I've done in such a short amount of time. Typically, when a narrator starts narrating, it's slow goings because they can only do it part-time and they have to learn the process, and I just learned really freaking fast and I booked the jobs. So they're not all publisher jobs. I mean, a lot of them are for indie authors and stuff, but if you book in the jobs, that means you got the voice. Grandpa. And a quantity of authors that are like, oh my God, I just love your voice. All right, Josie. I guess Octu didn't. And Josie patted the animal with a face full of sympathy. Never minded it a bit. Blackhawk said we could live on the horses several days and still travel before they felt it. But by another morning we found the buffalo, and I shot the one whose head is in my box, ready to hang up and scare brats into fits. He's a fierce old fellow, you bet. What is this strap for? Asked Ted, who was busily examining the Indian saddle, the single rein and snaffle with lariat. Lariat? Lariat? Good question. I think that's the name of a lariat. Is that the name of the boots brand? I'm in Texas, so we have a lot of Western clothing companies. I think that's the name of a clothing brand now. Lariat. Single rein. The single rein and snaffle with lariat, and round the neck the leather band he spoke of. We hold on to that when we lie along the horse's flank farthest from the enemy and fire under the neck as we gallop round and round. I'll show you. And springing into the saddle, Dan was off down the steps, tearing over the lawn at a great pace, sometimes on Octu's back, sometimes half hidden as he hung by stirrup and strap, and sometimes off altogether, running beside her as she loped along, enjoying the fun immensely, while Don raced after in a canine rapture at being free again and with his mates. It was a fine sight. The three wild things at play, so full of vigor, grace, and freedom that for the moment the smooth lawn seemed a prairie, and the spectators felt as if this glimpse of another life made their own seem rather tame and colorless. "This is better than a circus," cried Mrs. Joe, wishing she were a girl again that she might take a gallop on this chained lightning of a horse. "I foresee that Nan will have her hands full setting bones, for Ted will break every one of his trying to rival Dan. A few falls will not harm. A few falls." My voice is cracking. Grr. For the record, any reviews, there's a big thing among authors and narrators to stay out of reviewer spaces. So when you come into my space on my accounts and comment on my videos, you came into my space. If you're leaving reviews for the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, which is apparently going away, if you leave a comment for the podcast on a podcast app, that is for listeners. That is not for me. In fact, I very rarely will check just to see if I have new ones. I'd check. I don't think I read them. I don't think I've ever read them. Let's check to see how many there are, when the last one was posted. A few falls. Oh my God, my voice is not okay. A few falls will not harm, and this new care and pleasure will be good for him in all ways. But I fear Dan will never follow a plow after riding a Pegasus like that, answered Mr. Bear, as the black mare leapt the gate and came flying up the avenue, to stop at a word and stand quivering with excitement, while Dan swung himself off and looked up for applause. He received plenty of it, and seemed more pleased for his pet's sake than for his own. Ted clamored for a lesson at once and was soon at ease in the queer saddle, finding Octu gentle as a lamb as he trotted away to show off at college. Bess came hastening down the hill, having seen the race from afar, and all collected on the piazza while Dan yanked the cover off the big box the express had dumped before the door. Deparo? Airplane. Anyways, so if you're watching this and you don't like the way that I narrate, there are a lot of other podcasts like mine. Go find one you like. So personally, I don't usually DNF a book. I'll usually save for later because I'm a mood reader, which means that if I'm in the mood for romance, I want to read a romance. If I'm in the mood for fantasy, I want to read a fantasy. And if I'm reading a fantasy and I'm in a romance mood, it's not going to go. Even if I'm on the 4th book of a 4-book series and my brain's like, yep, we're in a romance mood now and it's a fantasy series. And so rather than drag myself through and force myself to keep reading it while I read slower because I'm not in the mood for fantasy anymore, I'm like, we're going to set it aside for later. So I don't DNF, which is do not finish a book. I set it aside for later. Eventually I'll be back in a fantasy mood and then I will do that. It's very annoying. I've been on a romance kick for a while though. I have a couple Nicholas Sparks ones I need to read. I've been reading his I feel like all in sad. He was the author that I started with for romance. So my mom would take us to the library. And at the time, A Walk to Remember was fresh out. And so I was able to check that out. And I read basically all of his books that the library had at the time. And now I own a lot of them. I don't own all of them. I started buying them myself when Dear John came out, I think. And I own some of them I own on Kindle and some of them I own on Nook. Cause for a while I worked for Barnes and Noble when the Nook was coming out. So I had a Nook. So some of my books are on Nook. Most of them are on Kindle. And then I have some physical copies of his. His Dear John I've actually bought twice because someone borrowed a copy and then never returned it. So I had to buy it a second time. Because that's one of my favorites of his is that one. But I own Dreamland, which I think came out last year. I haven't read it yet though. I think there's one before that I also own and haven't read. Just been reading other authors. And I tend to go through a binge. So I'll read one book by an author and really like it. So then I'll buy all of their books and read through all of them. That's what I tend to do. I haven't done that lately though. To borrow his own words, Dan usually traveled in light marching order and hated to have more luggage than he could carry in his well-worn valise. But now that he had a little money of his own, he had cumbered himself with a collection of trophies. I'm gonna need to take some cold medicine. But now that he had a little money of his own, he had cumbered himself with a collection of trophies won by his bow and spear, and brought them home to bestow upon his friends. We shall be devoured with moths, thought Mrs. Joe, as the shaggy head appeared, followed by a wolfskin rug for her feet, a bearskin ditto for the professor's study, and Indian garments bedecked with foxes' tails for the boys. All nice and warm for a July day, but received with delight nevertheless. Ted and Josie immediately dressed up, learned the war whoop, and proceeded to astonish their friends by a series of skirmishes about the house and grounds, with tomahawks and bows and arrows, till weariness produced a lull. Gay birds' wings, plumy pampas grass, strings of wampum, and pretty work in beads, bark, and feathers pleased the girls. Minerals, arrowheads, and crude sketches interested the professor, and when the box was empty, Dan gave Mr. Lorry as his gift several plaintive Indian songs written on birch bark. We only want a tent over us to be quite perfect, I feel as if I ought to give you parched corn and dried meat for dinner, my braves. Nobody will want lamb and green peas after this splendid powwow, said Mrs. Joe, surveying the picturesque confusion of the long hall, where people lay about on the rugs, all more or less bedecked with feathers, moccasins, or beads. One thing I do not like about this is how she addresses who says things. Like, it's always at the very end of whatever they say. It's like, that's why I have to constantly stop, because I'm like, who is talking after this big paragraph that's coming? This one's not a big paragraph. It's just a really long sentence. But the point is, it is always at the end. Moose noses, buffalo tongues, bear steaks, and roasted marrow bones would be the thing. But I don't mind a change, so bring on your baba and green meat, answered Dan from the box, where he sat in state like a chief among his tribe, with the great hound at his feet. The girls began to clear up, but made little headway, for everything they touched had a story, and all were thrilling, comical, or wild, so they found it hard to settle to their work till Dan was carried off by Mr. Lorry. This was the beginning of the summer holiday, and it was curious to see what a pleasant little stir Dan's and Emil's coming made in the quiet life of the studious community, where they seemed to bring a fresh breeze from them that enlivened with them. Oh my god, this is not working out for me. My stupid throat is being all gunky and irritating. How long is this chapter supposed to be anyways? That's the wrong thing, Joe's Boys. Chapter 5. We're not going to finish this chapter anyways. I am going to stop for now. Take some cold medicine. I need to get some stuff done over the weekend anyways. We're just going to finish this weekend because this is being a pain in my butt with the gunk in my throat. So, thanks guys. I will do part 2 tomorrow or Sunday, one of those days.